We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Gitin. This is Gittin Daf 73a. On the previous Amud, Rav Huna said, let's say you have a situation of a Shchimera who gives instructions to give a get, and the Shchimera gets better, so we say that those instructions are retracted. And the Gemara asked a question from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah talked about an individual who said, this is your get if I die from this particular illness. Then he got better, then he got sick again. So we evaluate when he died, did he die from the original illness or not? And so the Gemara asked, well, if he got better, automatically everything should be retracted. And the Gemara answered to that the case in our Mishnah is actually talking about where he went from one illness to the other illness. There really wasn't a time that he got better. And the Gemara asked, how can you say that? But the Mishnah seems to say, Amar Katani, the Mishnah seems to say that he did get better, and he was walking around in the marketplace. And the Gemara says it just means that he was walking around, al mishanto, he was walking around, but he had to use a staff. He never really got better. And the Gemara now continues that and concludes, V'akamash malon, and the chiddush of the Mishnah is, the halach al mishanto, that only in a situation where he was walking around, now he wasn't walking around totally better, but at least he was walking around with his staff, that's when we need to have some kind of evaluation and decide, did he actually die from the original illness? But let's say you would have another situation where he goes immediately from one illness to another, you wouldn't even need to evaluate. It's obvious that he did in fact die from the original illness. If there was no break whatsoever, you wouldn't even need to make such an evaluation. And the Gemara continues and says, Shamat minas, so should we learn from that? Let's say you have a Shchimera and he goes from one illness to the other. So the gift, if he says as a Shchimera that he's going to give a gift, he's giving away his property, that would be considered to be a good gift, because Rav Huna, really this entire discussion started on the previous Amud, where Rav Huna compared the Matan of a Shchimera to the get of a Shchimera. So now we're saying by Nitak Mecholi Lecholi, that's going to be a good get, so it should also be a good matana. Rashi explains matanaso matana in meis mecholi acher, meaning to say, let's say he dies from a different illness, but he just goes from one illness to the next. Because you just said that's not considered getting better. And Rashi points out it's only by get that we even need any kind of evaluation, because there he specifically said that I'm going to die from this illness. But in the general case of a shchimera who's giving away his property, so in such a situation, we're just talking about where he says, I'm giving away the property, we assume it means if he dies, then it's going to take effect. And if he doesn't die, it's not going to take effect. And it sounds like it should take effect, even if he goes from one illness to another illness. And the Gemara says, yes, that's actually correct. The Omer Rabbi Elazar, Mishmei de Rav, because Rabbi Elazar says in the name of Rav, Shchiv meira shenitzak mecholi l'choli, matanaso matana. If a Shchiv meira goes from one illness to the next illness, his gift is considered a gift that is not considered to be a retraction. And the Gemara continues, Rabba v'Rava lo svira luhu had Rav Huna. Rab and Rava, they don't hold of that which Rav Huna said. Again, Rav Huna said on the previous Amud, Gito kimatanaso, and essentially Rav Huna said that let's say the person gets better when he gives instructions to give a get, then he gets better. So we say there's a retraction. We say those instructions are no longer considered valid. Rashi says, Lo svira lu ad Rav Huna. They don't hold of what Rav Huna said, Deheicha de lo amar lo imati, meaning to say, let's say he doesn't say that I'm giving you the get if I die. He just gives instructions to give the get. Svira luhu, so they hold, meaning to say Rab and Rava hold, unlike Rav Huna, Rab and Rava hold him amar eno chozer, that if he gets better, so that's not an automatic retraction. He gave instructions to give a get. We follow through with those instructions, regardless, even if he gets better, we're going to follow through. What's the reason lo svira lu had Rav Huna? What's the reason they don't hold of what Rav Huna said? Gezer, it's all because of a gezer, it's all a decree. What's the decree? Shema yomru yesh get lachar misa, because if you're going to follow what Rav Huna says, people might end up saying that a get can take effect even after death. Rashi explains, Gezer Shema Yomru Yesh Get Lachar Misa. It's a Gezer, people might say that there's a get after death. The Amad Chozer, the point over here is, if you're going to say that if he gets better, then we retract his instructions, Asu L'meimar Lo Have a Get Adamai, so then people will say, well, it must be that if we're waiting to see if he dies for it to be a good get, it must be it's really being Chal only after he dies. The Kachazina de L'chimai is Havakit, because we see that if he dies, it is a good get. If he gets better, it's not. Shmami No Yesh Get Lachar Misa, people are going to conclude from that a person can give a get that's Chal after death. V'yasi Lachshure Zagitech Lachar Misa, and therefore people will end up saying that it's kosher if a person says this is your get after death. V'lo yadu, they don't realize, they don't know, Dekaven de lo parish midi, that since he didn't explain anything, that when he's giving it to her, what he's really saying is it's a get from now, it's all retroactive. On the condition that he dies, they don't realize that. And because of that, Gezer, people don't realize, so that's why they say, That's why they say in a situation where he gets better, it's not going to be a retraction, and they do not follow what Rav Huna said. Again, it's a gezeira that people are going to think there's a get lachar misa. And the Gemara asks on that, Umika midi de midoraisa lo have gita. Is there really such a thing that on a doraisa level we're saying really Rav Huna is correct? Really, according to the Torah, we're going to say there's a retraction, it's not a good get. Umishum gezeira, and just because of this gezeira of Rabba and Rava, Sharina Neisha Liyama, we allow a married woman to now marry others. We say she's divorced. Essentially, what Rabba and Rava are saying is that really on a doraisa level, there should be a retraction and it shouldn't be a get, and they're making it a good get on a Rabbanan level. Is that possible? And the Gemara says, yes, that is possible. Called the Mekadesh Adai to the Rabbanan Mekadesh. Anyone who has a Kiddushin, it's all on the understanding of the Rabbanan. This is the understanding of the Rabbanan, that it's a good get. Ve'afki inu Rabbanan l'Kiddushin minei. What's actually happening over here is the Rabbanan are undoing the Kiddushin. They have that power to undo a Kiddushin. Amar le Ravina Ravashi. Ravina said to Ravashi, Teinach the Kodesh bechaspa. That makes sense that they have such a power when the Kiddushin is done with money. Kodesh bebia ma'ikol memar. But if the act of Kiddushin is an act of relations, what are you going to say over there? Do the Rabbanan have such a power? Amar le said back to him, Shavi Rabbanan lebilaso bilas nos. The Rabbanan are able to render the act of relations as an act of relations that's nos. It's not an act of relations that's Kiddushin, and that's how they're able to undo the Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, let's say the husband says to the wife, this is your get from today. If I die from this particular illness, but then he doesn't die from the illness, instead the house falls on him, or he's bit by a snake, Eino get. It's not considered to be a get. Imlo emod mecholizel. Let's say the way he phrased it is he says, this is your get if I don't get better from this illness. So in that situation, v'nafal olav habayis, if the house falls on him, or he's bitten by a snake, hareza get, that is considered to be a get. And the Gemara asks, Maishna Reishu, Maishna Seifa. What's the difference between the first case and the second case? They should really be identical in both cases. The person didn't actually die, or the person didn't actually get better. What actually happened was the house fell upon him, and so we should say it's the same halacha. Rashi will explain exactly what the question is. And the Gemara answers, Shalchu mitam, they sent a message from over there, they sent a message from Eretz Yisrael, Achlu ari ein lanu, if he's eaten by a lion. So in that situation, that's considered an onus de lo shliach, essentially, and we'll see Rashi as well. They answered that we don't make a distinction between the two cases. Rashi says, Eino get, it's not considered to be a get. Why? The onsa de lo shliachu, because this is an onus that's not common. Nobody would expect that the house would fall on them or be bitten by a snake. Velo masak adaita, he never thought of this. Velo amar ela diyamas, the whole condition is that he dies from the illness, but if something else happens, so it's not going to be a get. But again, then the second half of the phrase was, if he says, Imlo emod mecholiz, if I don't get better and the same exact thing happens, so then it is a good get. And so that's why the Gemara asked, Ma'ishna Reisha, what's the difference between the first case and the second case? Meaning as follows, if you're going to say that in onus that's not common is something that he thinks of, is a possibility that enters the person's mind, so it should be identical. Reisha nami lahavigita. So in the Reisha also it should be a get. He thought of this. Dahamitoch oso choli meis, because he died while he was still ill. Because when a person says mecholi zeh, it certainly does not mean that he has to die exactly from the illness. It just means to say that he has this illness when he dies. And so really this all has to do with onsa de lo shchiach. That's how Rashi understands the Gemara. That's why the Gemara asked Ma'ishna Reisha, Ma'ishna Seif. In both cases, it's an onus de lo shchiach. If you're going to say it's something that he thinks of, so it's part of the condition. If you say it's something that never enters his mind, so it's not part of the condition. And the Gemara ultimately answered, Shalchu mitam, they sent a message from over there, from Eretz Yisrael, al yedei ma'aseh she'ira be'echad she'amar, im lo emon michol izeh, meaning there was an incident that happened, where somebody said, if I don't get better from this illness, v'yachlu ari, then he was eaten by a lion, v'shalchu adavar l'Eretz Yisrael, they then sent this question to Eretz Yisrael, v'yeshivu, and the answer was, ein lanu she'yeh get, that it's not a get, meaning even in the second case. In Eretz Yisrael, they were saying in all cases, it's not going to be a get, whether the phrase was, imati mechol izeh, or whether the phrase was, im lo emon mechol izeh, doesn't matter. It's not going to be a get, the onsa, the lo shchiach, lo asakat daiti, because if you have an onus that's not common, that's not something that the person thinks of when he makes the condition, and therefore it's not a get. And the Gemara continues, Hahu Gavra dezavin ara lechavre, there was an individual who sold a piece of property to his friend, Kabalolea kolonsa de misyalet, and he accepted upon himself any onus that happens, he'll reimburse, he'll take care of the person who he's selling the field to. L'sof apiko ba nahara. In the end, the government said that we're going to have a river go through this field. Asa l'kamid Ravina. So he came before Ravina. He said, my field was taken away, and the seller took full achrayas. He has to reimburse me. Amar Lei said to him, Zil shafile. So he said, you have to take care of him. You have to reimburse him. Tal kabilas alach kolon to the misyalid, because you accepted any onus that would happen, and this, even though it's an onus of the lo shchiach that happened, but an onus happened, and therefore you have to reimburse. Amar Le Ravacha bar Tachlifa le Ravina. Ravacha bar Tachlifa said to Ravina, onus of the lo shchiach, this is an onus that's not common. He's not taking upon himself such an onus. Egalgil milsu matalakame de Rava. Eventually, the matter came before Rava. Amar Lahu, he said to them, onus of the lo shchiach. He gave the same answer. It's an onus that's not common. Therefore, he doesn't take responsibility. The seller does not take responsibility for that. Esvei Ravina l'Rava. Ravina asked Rava the following question. He asked from the above case. Imlo emod mecholiz, that we said above, that if the person says, if I don't get better from this illness, v'nafal alav habayi, so ikishu nachash, and the house falls on him, or he gets bit by a snake, hareza get, it is considered to be a good get. Now that's the part of the brisa that essentially the Gemara undid. The Gemara said shalchum itam, that really it's not a get, but he asked a question from that line where it says it is a get, even though it's an onus to lo shchiach, apparently still it's a get. Amar le Rava. Rava said to him, ve'ema me reisha, but if you're already asking from that brisa, why not ask from the reisha of that brisa? It said eino get. It said in the beginning of the get that if he phrases it, if he says imamati mecholizeh, so then it's not a get, because again it's an onus to lo shchiach. And the Gemara said, Amar le Ravacha midifti le Ravina. But Ravacha midifti said to Ravina, Misham de kasha reisha ha-seifa, just because you have a contradiction, a question from the reisha of the brisa on the seif of the brisa, lo mosvinan to yuftamina, we're not able to ask a question, we should still be able to ask a question from the seifa of that brisa. Amar le said to him, yes, once you have a contradiction between the reisha and the seifa, you can't ask a question from over there. Kevan de kasha reisha ha-seifa, since there's a contradiction between the reisha and the seifa, lo itmar be midrasha, so this brisa is not said in the Beis Medrash, umishabeshti, it's considered to be a brisa that has an error, and therefore we don't ask a question from that brisa. Rather, zil basar svara. Rather, we follow logic, and again, the logic tells us that by an onus to lo shchicha, that's not something the person had in mind. He doesn't take responsibility for such an onus. And the Gemara continues, Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua zavin shumshem yagida de nahar Malka. Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua, they bought sesame on the banks of the Malka River. Agar malchi lavurinu, and they hired some sailors to cross them over the river. Kabilu alayu, and the sailors accepted upon themselves kol onsa de misyalid. Any onus that would happen, they accepted they would pay for that. L'sof istacher nahar Malka. In the end, they dammed up the river. They weren't able to take them across the river by boat. Amruluhu, so they said to them, meaning Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua said to the sailors, you took responsibility, so therefore, agoru chamri afkinu nihilon, you should hire donkeys, you should give them to us, we can use those. Dakabiltu alaychu kolonsa de misyalid, because you accepted any onus that would happen. Also, l'kamei de Rava, they came before Rava. This was now a court case. They came before Rava. Amar Lahu, he said to them, kaki chivri, he said, white geese, referring to Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua, because they had white beards. Mishalchi glimi de inshi, you strip people of their clothing, meaning to say, well, you're acting unfairly in this case, because onsa de lo shchiach, this is an onus that's not common, that they do not accept upon themselves. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, lo tisyachid imo, she's not allowed to be in seclusion with him, ela bifnei edim, unless it's in front of witnesses, so that way they will not have relations from this point in time. And Rashi explains the case, lo tesiachid imo zeshen nasan get v'yomer lo mehayomim mati. We're going on the case of the previous Mishnah. The husband gives his wife a get, and he says to her, the get is going to be effective from today if I die. So essentially, it's going to be retroactively. They're going to be divorced from today, and they shouldn't have relations. That's why they shouldn't go into seclusion with each other unless there are witnesses. Lo tesiachid imo, she shouldn't be in seclusion with him. Shema yavo oleh. Maybe they're going to have relations. It's already going to be after the divorce. Because first, there's a man damar that says we're concerned if they do have relations, maybe it was for the sake of Kiddushin. Now she's going to need a get again because they had a Kiddushin again. And even according to the one who isn't concerned that it's L'Shem Kiddushin, but nevertheless they shouldn't have relations because Penuya, she's an unmarried woman, the get is going to be Chal retroactively. There's a prohibition. It's forbidden to be in seclusion with a Penuya with an unmarried woman. That's why it says, Lo tisyachid imo ela b'fnei edim. She's not allowed to go in seclusion with him unless there are witnesses present so that they won't have relations. And the Mishnah continues, Afilu al pi eved, afilu al pi shifcha. The seclusion's allowed to happen even if the witness is just an eved or a shifcha, if it's just a slave or it's a maidservant. Chutz mi shifchasa, except for her own personal shifcha, mimnei shaliba gaspa b'shifchasa, because she's comfortable with her shifcha and with her own personal shifcha, there still is a concern that they would have relations. And the Mishnah continues, Mahi ba'osan hayamim. So what's her status during that time period, during that interim time period from the mehayom, from the time the get could be chal retroactively until imati, until the husband actually dies, that interim period where we're waiting for the condition to be fulfilled, what's her status? Rabbi Yehuda says, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis.